Hi everyone. We're back with lecture number 12. We're going to be taking a look today at the Far East, specifically Chinese and Japanese civilizations during the 19th century. Now, if you'll recall, regarding trade with China, China had strictly limited at an early time their foreign trade with other powers. So much so that by 1800, essentially there were only two maritime trading ports that were open to foreign powers, Macau and Canton. And as the British continued to reach out across the world after experiencing their Industrial Revolution, as they sought out new markets to sell their goods, they had been trying for years to open up new ports of trade in China, but they were unsuccessful. This is frustrating the British. They also are forced to pay silver for their goods to the Chinese government, which was often hard to come by. So the British began trying to figure out, is there a way we can change this trade imbalance, right? That we're buying more Chinese goods rather than they're buying from us. Can we open up this country to other markets? The British will ultimately settle upon a particular crop that will be grown in India underneath their domination. They're going to find a market in China for the opium trade. So let's spend a few minutes talking about Britain during the 19th century as global drug dealers. So the British figured out that opium might be able to address this trade imbalance between themselves and China. Opium was produced in Bengal and Madras in Britain's colonies in the Indian subcontinent, and they had become a major component of trade with other powers. So now they want to try and crack open the Chinese market. Opium was a very powerful painkiller, and it had severe addictive narcotic properties. This made it popular not just for medical use, but for recreational use as well in many areas of the world. And as one of the few products that the Chinese proved to be willing to buy from the outside world, the British are going all in, right? They want to sell as much opium as they possibly can. Unfortunately, as the Chinese government will quickly figure out, this is not a good trade item to introduce into your country. It created a public health crisis. What had started out as a medicine turned into, a recreational use that basically debilitated many port cities in which it was introduced. It seemed that certain areas of cities were just now crammed full of opium addicts that were debilitated by their addiction to this substance. By 1729, it had become such a problem that the Qing emperor prohibited the sale and smoking of opium. This did not stop the British, however, from trading, and a subsequent Chinese emperor also allowed opium importation and cultivation. In spite of such decrees, however, the opium trade continued to flourish, only now illegally. From 1800 to 1840, the amount of opium smuggled each year into China increased more than 10 times. Its value soon exceeded that of all Chinese goods sold to the British. This will shift the trade balance in the favor of the West, as silver now begins flowing out of China instead of in. In 1839, the Chinese emperor appointed Lincheshu to control this trade, sending him to the city of Canton to deal with this problem. He will appeal directly to British merchants there, but they refused to listen because they were making money off of the trade. He will also send an impassioned letter directly to the Queen of England, begging their country to stop pushing these drugs into China. You can see a portion of the letter that he composed in 1839 here on the slide. Those who smuggle it in to seduce the Chinese people cause the spread of this poison to all the provinces. He's talking about imposing the death penalty for those who smoke opium in the country. He goes on to talk about and ask the Queen of England, where is your conscience, right? That he reminds her that the smoking of opium is very strictly forbidden by your country, but yet you're willing to visit this harm on our country. Further, we will see that the Qing government will take the drastic step of halting all foreign commerce and blockading ships in their harbors until they surrendered opium that was secretly hidden on these British ships. While this was within their rights to do this, they're an independent nation, their actions eventually caused the British to become enraged and triggered a series of wars launched by the British, collectively known as the Opium Wars. You can see here in the initial Opium War, the first outbreak of hostilities between 1839 and 1842, some of the areas in which the British chose to attack. Remember, at this stage, Britain has the biggest and best navy in the entire world. And what we're going to see through the Opium Wars is this will end up humiliating the Chinese. This will be a very lopsided war in which the British will come out easily on top. The British clearly demonstrated their superior firepower, easily defeating China's outmoded military forces. They then set about occupying Chinese ports and sent a 70-ship armada up the Yangtze River as a show of British naval superiority. And believe it or not, even though Britain was the aggressor in this war, because they are the winner of this war, they will force China to pay a huge indemnity or a huge war debt. That's what that means. And they're also going to be forced to export indentured servants to the West. These Opium Wars, like I said, are a tremendous humiliation to the Chinese. They're sort of a wake-up call that they are virtually helpless militarily against the rest of the world and that they need to do something to change that. And the weakened Qing dynasty, led by the Manchu leadership class, they really can't do anything. They will protest, of course, but they can't actually stop the British from taking over their country. Adding insult to injury, Mother Nature is going to deal several blows to the fading Qing dynasty in China during this period. Floods and famine started to ravage the landscape. A sustained drought during the 1850s burned up crops in the fields before they could be harvested, causing widespread famine in many areas. Putting all these pieces together, we will see the largest domestic uprising in the history of the world take place in China during the Taiping Rebellion. This mass revolt involved tens of millions of people and millions of dollars worth of devastation. People were tired of their foreign government, this Manchu leadership and the Qing dynasty, and this bloody civil war lasted for 14 years, consuming as many as 20 million lives. In addition to these natural disasters, another huge component in kicking all of this off was, the dissatisfaction over the opium conflicts. The influx of Western ideas, especially Christianity, also turned off many native Chinese. On this last point specifically, one of the key leaders of this revolt will be Cho Kwan. Cho Kwan was deeply influenced by Christian ideas that he learned about in several missionary pamphlets that he had been exposed to years prior. What we'll see is that he's going to ultimately, after having reportedly a series of religious visions, he's going to decide that he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ and that he was destined to lead the Chinese back to God. He also came to believe through these visions that God had instructed him to get rid of all the foreign devils, as they were known, who were destroying the country, and establish China based upon strict Christian ethics by banning the use of opium, alcohol, adultery, and gambling. He will bring together his ever-victorious army, which will be a mighty fighting force in rebelling against Qing leadership. Now, while Cho Kwan sounds a bit cray-cray, let's call it for what it is, he gained a lot of support from people who had been alienated by all of the recent conflicts in China, the excesses of opium abuse. There were many people who really did deeply resent foreign interference in their country. In 1853, Hong led rebels to capture the city of Nanjing with the goal of setting up a utopian society there. But needless to say, the Western powers, Britain and many others, saw this internal uprising, this nationalist uprising by the Chinese, they saw it as a deep threat to their trade with the Chinese. So they actually allied with the Qing government to put down this internal uprising. Hong was killed as his forces were ultimately decimated. And later, for the Chinese in the century, after losing another war, this one to the Japanese in 1894 and 1895, the Chinese were ultimately forced to open their country to not only trade with Britain, but France and many other European powers, even the United States and Russia. China's humiliation after this long string of defeats during the 19th century led European powers to take open advantage of the country. And we'll see that they will pursue a policy called carving up the Chinese melon. However, for the Chinese people, they are not going to continue to suffer this series of embarrassments and humiliations, just allowing it to happen. If their own government couldn't protect them, then we will see more uprisings. We see the Boxer Rebellion. We'll see the people taking matters into their own hands. The Boxer Rebellion was triggered by a religious society that practiced martial arts. They practiced animist magical rituals and spells, which they believed made them impervious to bullets and pain. They will find out that's not the case, but what they really want to do is kick out foreigners. They want to get rid of Western Christian missionaries. They want to expel foreign businesses, and they want China to take its fate in its own hands once more. By late 1899, the Boxers and other affiliated nationalist groups were openly attacking Chinese Christians and Western missionaries and roaming the countryside around the capital of Beijing. They set to burning churches and foreign residents. They killed a number of foreign Western missionaries. And in August of 1900, an international force, including U.S. troops, French troops, Italian, Japanese, and British troops, finally captured Beijing and put down the Boxer Rebellion at great loss of life. Then foreign troops looted the capital, and the Qing dynasty is going out the door now. I mean, they've already been on their last legs, incredibly weak for some time, but European powers now basically have total control over China. In the years that followed this latest embarrassment, there was a tremendous amount of lingering resentment against the Qing dynasty for failing to protect the country from foreign domination. So what we will see is while the Qing government is like barely hanging on by a thread, during the Qinghai Revolution of 1911, the imperial state will once and for all collapse. Dr. Sun Yat-sen will emerge as the most important radical figure of this era. He was a Western-educated Christian and had studied medicine, and when he returned to China in 1883, he saw how backward his country had become economically, politically, and militarily, and he sought to change that. Over time, he put together a revolutionary alliance and helped to launch a number of revolts against the Qing dynasty. But in the fall of 1911, this is the final one that will be successful in expelling the Qing leadership. But even though Sun Yat-sen had worked tirelessly for many years to achieve Chinese liberation, but the fact that he had spent so much time out of the country and he spoke English, he was a Christian, he was still, believe it or not, considered a foreigner by those who participated in this revolution. So he will not be placed in power, even though he helped to engineer the successful revolution. Unfortunately, the leadership that was put into place after the 1911 revolution turned into a dictatorship. Worse, socially speaking, the 1911 revolution was a complete failure. It did not bring about systemic change in the composition of the Chinese ruling classes. Yes, the emperor and his officials were gone, but the conservative landlords had not been overthrown and were still ruling with a free hand in the countryside. Revolutionaries and intellectuals who helped run the republic were powerless in the presence of these conservative forces. Secondly, the revolution was limited just to the city areas. In the rural regions, Chinese villages were just as backwards and conservative as they had been before this revolution. And things get even grimmer as it becomes apparent that this revolution has failed to unify the country under its control. We see a power vacuum emerging in certain regions, resulting in the rise of warlords. The result, tens of millions of civilians dead, no real political change, and more foreign domination. We'll pick up with the second half of this lecture in just a few minutes in the next video.